It started on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning that feels heavier than usual, even though the world outside looks the same. The sun was shining through the curtains, the birds were making their usual noise, and the city sounded alive. But inside me everything was different. That day I learned what betrayal really feels like. I sat at the long wooden table in my father's office. The same table where I grew up watching deals being made, laughter being shared, and dreams being built. For years, that table represented everything our family stood for: unity, trust, hard work. But that day it became a battlefield, and I was on the losing side before the war even began. My brothers and cousins were all there, dressed sharp in their suits, pretending everything was normal. My father sat at the head of the table, his hands folded neatly, his face calm but distant. My mother avoided my eyes. She looked down, pretending to read some papers. I knew she couldn't bear to look at me because deep down, she already knew what was about to happen. When my father finally spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that silences everyone. "We've made some decisions," he said, his tone flat, "about the future of the family business." I had waited for this day for years. Ever since I was a child, I dreamed of working beside him, proving myself worthy, earning my place in the company that defined our family name. I worked harder than anyone, late nights, long hours, endless effort just to show I was capable. But what I didn't know was that no amount of work could fight the quiet bias already set in their minds. My father looked at each of my brothers one by one, announcing their shares, their roles, their future titles. My cousins too received their portions. Smiles spread across their faces, some proud, some greedy, but all certain. Then he turned to me. For a moment the room felt too still, too quiet. My heart was beating so loudly I could almost hear it echoing against the wooden walls. He sighed, his eyes soft but distant. "You've done well," he said slowly, "but this kind of responsibility is not for everyone." I didn't understand at first. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He avoided my gaze. "You're not capable of running a business like this. It's too demanding. It's not your strength." The words hit harder than any slap could. Not capable. Not my strength. After all those years of proving myself, those were the words he chose. Around me no one spoke. My brothers looked away. One of them, Daniel, tried to hide a small smirk. My cousins shifted in their seats. My mother reached out to touch my father's arm, but he didn't look at her either. It was done. In that moment, everything I believed about family shattered. I sat there quietly, nodding, pretending I understood. But inside, my heart was breaking in ways I couldn't even describe. That day I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stood up, thanked them for considering me, and walked out of the room like a stranger in my own home. Outside the sunlight was too bright. The air felt heavy. I could hear their voices still echoing behind the closed door, discussing plans, property, power, everything that I thought I'd one day be a part of. I got in my car and drove aimlessly for hours, past familiar streets, past childhood memories, past everything that once felt like home. I stopped at a small cafe at the edge of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet. I sat by the window, ordered a cup of coffee, and stared out, thinking about everything that had just happened. The bitterness of the coffee matched the bitterness inside me. I felt small, humiliated, invisible. I kept hearing my father's voice, "You're not capable." But somewhere between the silence and the pain, a new thought started to form. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't capable, at least not in their world, under their rules, by their standards. But what if I built my own world? What if I didn't need their approval, their company, their validation? That thought was the first spark of something new. In that small cafe, surrounded by strangers, I made a silent promise to myself. I would build something bigger. Something better. Something that would make them remember my name every time they looked at their so-called empire. I didn't know where to start. I had no office, no team, no money, no support. But I had one thing they didn't: pain. And pain, when used right, can build entire empires. For days I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment in my head. Their faces, their words, the look of disappointment in my father's eyes. It became the fire that burned inside me. I started small. Late nights, cheap coffee, secondhand laptop, and a dream that felt too impossible to say out loud. I worked quietly like a shadow away from their world. No one believed in me, and maybe that was my biggest strength. Months passed. Slowly things started to change. I learned from every mistake, adapted, fought harder. I didn't tell anyone what I was building because I wanted my success to speak for itself one day. And it did. But that part of the story, that comes later. Because before success came another betrayal. Another test. One that would push me further than I thought I could ever go. The night it happened, I was in my small office, a tiny rented room with peeling paint and a flickering bulb. The rain outside was pouring hard, thunder rolling in the distance. I remember thinking how storms always made me feel alive. Then my phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in months. I picked it up, and the voice on the other end changed everything. I held the phone to my ear, the sound of rain filling the silence between us. For a few seconds no one spoke. Just that faint crackle on the line, and then, his voice. Calm, measured, but heavy with something unspoken. "You need to come home," he said. It was Daniel. My brother. The one who'd smirked when they'd called me not capable. For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. Come home. After everything they'd done? I almost laughed. But there was something in his tone, an unease, a strain, that stopped me. "Why?" I asked, my voice steady though my heart was pounding. He hesitated. "Dad isn't well," he finally said. "And things are getting complicated. We need to talk." Complicated. That word echoed in my head long after the call ended. I didn't know whether it was guilt or anger that made my hands tremble. Maybe both. Part of me wanted to rush back to see my father, to know what was happening. But another part, the part that still remembered the sting of his words, refused to go back just because they suddenly needed me. Still that night sleep didn't come. I sat by the window watching the rain slide down the glass, thinking about everything that had brought me here. The family business wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. My grandfather started it with nothing but an idea and the will to make it real. My father expanded it, turning it into something powerful. And all of us, his children, were supposed to carry it forward together. That was the plan. But plans have a way of changing when pride gets involved. Growing up, I was the quiet one. The one who stayed up late studying ledgers, listening to meetings I wasn't supposed to be in, watching my father make decisions that shaped lives. My brothers were louder, more confident, more visible. But I was the one who paid attention. I thought that mattered. I remembered once, when I was 16, I'd found an error in one of the company's reports. A mistake that could have cost thousands. I stayed up all night fixing it, and the next morning I handed it to my father. He barely looked up from his desk. "Good," he said as if it meant nothing. Then Daniel walked in with coffee for him, and suddenly he was smiling, praising him for being thoughtful. That moment stayed with me for years. Maybe that's when I realized that in his eyes, I'd always be the one who tried, but never the one who was enough. When I finally fell asleep that night, my dreams were scattered pieces of the past. Boardrooms, arguments, my father's voice echoing in disappointment, and my own silence swallowing everything I wanted to say. The next morning I woke up to another message from Daniel. "We need to discuss Dad's will. It's important." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I wanted to ignore it, pretend I hadn't seen it. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pushed me to respond. I agreed to meet them that evening. Driving back to the old house felt strange. The roads looked the same, but everything else felt distant. The gates opened slowly, creaking like they hadn't been used in years, though I knew they had. The house stood tall and silent, just like I remembered, but now it felt colder. Daniel was waiting at the door, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. "You look different," he said. I didn't reply. I just walked past him. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and tension. My mother appeared from the hallway, her eyes tired. "You came," she said softly, almost surprised. "He's upstairs." I followed her gaze toward the staircase but hesitated. "What's going on?" She looked down. "He's been sick for months." "He didn't tell you because," she trailed off, unable to finish. "Because I wasn't supposed to matter anymore." That's what she meant, even if she couldn't say it. When I walked into his room, my father was sitting by the window, a blanket draped over his shoulders. The once powerful man who used to command every room now looked smaller, frilier. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were still the same. "So you decided to come?" he said without turning around. "I heard you weren't well," I replied quietly. He finally looked at me. There was no smile, no warmth. "There's a lot you don't know," he said. "About the business. About what's happening now." Before I could ask what he meant, Daniel walked in. "We should talk about the new deal," he said quickly, as if trying to steer the conversation away from anything personal. My father nodded slowly. "Yes, the deal. Things are changing faster than I expected." They started discussing company matters, contracts, shares, a merger I hadn't even heard of. I stood there, realizing how far I'd been pushed out of their world. They were talking in numbers and names that once felt like home but now sounded like a foreign language. Then, in the middle of their discussion, my father suddenly coughed hard. Daniel rushed to him, but he waved him off. "I'm fine," he muttered, but his breathing was uneven. That moment, seeing him struggle, did something to me. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel that same old pull, that need to protect, to care, to fix things. But I didn't move. I just stood there watching him catch his breath, knowing he'd never let me in. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside for some air. The garden looked just like it always had. Trimmed hedges, polished stone pathways, the fountain still running. But the sound of water didn't calm me anymore. Daniel joined me a few minutes later. "You've built something, haven't you?" he asked suddenly. I turned to him, surprised. "What makes you think that?" He shrugged. "I've heard things. Small maybe. But people are talking. You've been busy." I didn't answer. He smiled faintly, that same half-smile that used to drive me crazy. "Dad won't admit it, but he knows. He just doesn't know how to handle it. You building your own thing, it scares him." I stared at him, unsure whether he was trying to comfort me or manipulate me. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said, lowering his voice, "the company isn't as stable as it looks. There's pressure from investors, legal issues. Dad's not telling the full story. If you're smart, you'll stay out of it." And with that, he walked back inside, leaving me with 100 unanswered questions and a feeling I couldn't shake. Something big was coming, something that would drag me back into the world I tried to escape. That night, as I drove home, my mind was spinning. Every word Daniel said replayed over and over. Legal issues. Investors. Secrets. I didn't know what to believe. But deep down, I could feel it. Whatever was happening in that company wasn't just business trouble. It was personal. When I reached my apartment, the city lights flickered outside my window. I sat down at my desk, staring at my old laptop, the one that started it all. My small project, once just an idea, had started to gain traction. People were noticing. It wasn't big yet, but it was growing, quietly and steadily. I opened an email that had arrived earlier that evening, from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." My heart skipped. I clicked it open. There were no words, just one attachment. A document. And at the top of that document was the company's logo, our family's name. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the mouse. Part of me wanted to close it, to walk away, to not get dragged into whatever this was. But the other part, the one that still burned from being called not capable, needed to know. I opened it. And what I saw inside changed everything I thought I knew about my family, my father, and the business that tore us apart. The file opened slowly, like it was taking its time to reveal what I wasn't supposed to see. The document wasn't long, just a few pages, but each line felt heavier than the last. It was a financial report, a secret one. At first glance, it looked like another business summary full of numbers and transactions. But the more I read, the more it became clear that something wasn't right. Funds had been moved. Accounts had been closed and reopened under different names. There were investments I'd never heard of, and signatures that didn't match my father's usual approval style. My stomach tightened. Someone inside the company was hiding money. I kept scrolling line after line until I reached the end, and froze. My name was there. Not once but twice. My name listed under pending liabilities. According to that document, I was supposedly responsible for a failed deal worth thousands of dollars. A deal I never made. A deal I didn't even know existed. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stared at the screen, unable to move. Why would they do this? Who would gain anything by putting my name there? Was it a mistake or something intentional? I printed the document, my hands shaking as I watched the paper slide out of the machine. The room felt colder now. The sound of rain outside was softer than before, but inside, everything felt louder. My heartbeat, my thoughts, my anger. For days I couldn't focus. I went to work, I smiled at people, but my mind was elsewhere. Every memory of my family now had a different shadow. Maybe this was the reason they'd cut me out. Maybe they were trying to protect themselves, not the business. 3 nights later, I decided to go back. Not to confront anyone yet, but to confirm what I saw. I waited until late evening when the office lights would be dim and the building quiet. The family's main office was in the heart of the city, all glass and steel, looking powerful and perfect from the outside. I still had my old access card. Part of me was surprised it even worked when I swiped it. The hallway smelled the same, coffee, paper, and something faintly metallic. I walked past the boardroom where it had all started, the echo of my father's voice still in my mind. "You're not capable." I reached his office. The door was locked, but Daniel's office next to it wasn't. His desk was neat, but one drawer was slightly open. Inside were more documents, half-signed contracts, and something that caught my eye, a folder labeled reallocation plan. I opened it carefully. Inside were the same reports I'd seen in that email, only this time there were signatures. My father's, Daniel's, and another name I didn't recognize, Alan Pierce. Next to each document was a date. And one of those dates matched the same week they'd told me I was out of the business. So that was it. The timing wasn't a coincidence. They'd made decisions, shifted assets, and cut me out to cover something up. I wasn't not capable, I was inconvenient. I put the folder back exactly as I found it and left quietly. The streets were almost empty when I stepped outside, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I wanted to confront them right then, but something told me to wait. When I got home, there was a message waiting for me. No name, just a number and a voice note. I played it. "Be careful," the voice said. It was a man's voice, calm but urgent. "You're getting close to something you shouldn't. They're not who you think they are." I replayed it 3 times, trying to recognize the voice. It wasn't Daniel's. It wasn't anyone from the company I could think of. Who was warning me? And how did they know I'd seen the documents? Over the next few days, I became restless. At work, I couldn't concentrate. I'd started my own business to escape their control, but now it felt like their shadow was following me everywhere. I began noticing things: unfamiliar cars parked near my building, emails with no sender names, missed calls from private numbers. Maybe it was just paranoia. Or maybe someone really didn't want me looking deeper. I decided to meet the only person I trusted from that world, my father's old assistant, Mr. Hale. He'd been with our family for more than 20 years and had seen everything. If anyone knew what was going on, it was him. When I found him, he looked older than I remembered, his face lined with the kind of stress that doesn't come from age but from carrying too many secrets. We met at a small diner far from the city center. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said quietly, stirring his tea without looking up. "You know what's happening, don't you?" I asked. He sighed, glancing around as if the walls had ears. "You shouldn't be asking those questions." "I already saw the reports," I said, lowering my voice. "The missing funds. The fake deals. My name." He finally looked at me, then, his eyes full of worry. "Then you already know too much." "What does that mean?" I pressed. He hesitated. "It means that what you saw, what's in those documents, it's only the surface. There's more. Much more. And if you keep digging, you'll find things that can't be undone." "Who's behind it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. "This is all I can give you," he said. "Don't contact me again." When he left, I opened the paper. It was an address. No explanation, no signature. Just a location. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it led to proof? What if it explained everything? By morning, curiosity had already won. I drove to the address. It was an old warehouse near the docks, half abandoned, windows covered in dust. It didn't look like much. Inside, the air smelled of oil and rust. But in one corner, under a stack of old crates, I found a small locked cabinet. It took some effort, but I managed to pry it open. Inside were files, dozens of them. Contracts, photographs, old company letters. But one file stood out. It had my father's handwriting on it and a name I didn't expect to see, Alan Pierce. I flipped through it and my breath caught. Alan wasn't an investor. He was a consultant the company had hired years ago for a failed expansion. But what shocked me was the evidence inside. Emails between Alan and Daniel, discussing how to restructure assets and redefine ownership. They'd planned everything. The removal, the division, even my exclusion. And at the bottom of one page, I found a note in Daniel's handwriting: "She'll never see this coming." I stood there in silence, the truth crashing down around me. My own brother. My family. They hadn't just pushed me out. They'd built their empire on lies, and I was the easiest one to erase. I took pictures of everything, every page, every signature. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. As I left the warehouse, my phone buzzed again. Another message from that same unknown number. This time it was just one sentence. "They know you've been there." I stopped walking. My heart froze. I looked around. The street was empty, but I felt eyes on me. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine started. The rain began to fall again, light at first, then heavier. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove away, my mind racing. Every truth I'd uncovered had led to another question. And now, I wasn't sure if I was uncovering a family secret, or stepping into something much darker. I didn't know it then, but that night was only the beginning. The moment I opened that document, I crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And from that point on, every move I made would come with a price I wasn't yet ready to pay. I drove through the rain that night without really knowing where I was going. The wipers moved back and forth, but I barely saw the road. My mind was a storm of its own. Images of my father, Daniel, the forged documents, that strange voice message, everything blended into one restless blur. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting a car to be following me. Every pair of headlights felt suspicious. Every shadow looked alive. When I finally reached my apartment, I parked a few blocks away and sat in the car for a long time, trying to breathe. My hands were trembling. I knew what I'd found could destroy everything they'd built, but I also knew how powerful they were. If they could erase me from the company, what else could they do? Inside, I spread the photos and documents across my small table. My laptop screen glowed softly, lighting up the papers scattered everywhere, proof of manipulation, betrayal, and deceit. I'd never imagined my own family would go this far just to keep control. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was the realization that maybe love had never been the foundation of our family, it was always power. The phone buzzed again. A new message. This time a video file. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won again. The video showed security footage, grainy, time-stamped from 2 nights ago. It was the company's office lobby. Daniel was there talking to someone. My heart sank when I recognized the man. It was Alan Pierce. They shook hands and then Alan handed him a thick envelope. The video ended there, no sound, no explanation. My pulse quickened. They were still working together. Whatever had started years ago wasn't over, it was still happening right now. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I started connecting every piece of evidence. Names, dates, accounts, deals. Slowly, a pattern began to form. Every missing amount, every reallocation pointed back to one project, something called Aurora Holdings. I'd never heard of it, but the name appeared in almost every suspicious document. The next morning, I visited an old friend, Rafik, who used to work in corporate investigations. He owed me a favor. Aurora Holdings? He repeated, typing quickly into his system. It's registered under a shell company in Singapore. No official records here. But wait, he frowned. This is interesting. The local partner listed is a private firm owned by Daniel Reynolds. My stomach dropped. He used my father's company money to start his own? Rafik nodded slowly. Looks that way. And not just that, he's been moving funds overseas through fake contracts. That's fraud. I felt dizzy. Everything was falling into place now. The lies, the fake deals, the reason they needed me gone. If I'd stayed, I would have found out. Removing me wasn't about doubting my capability. It was about silencing me before I ever saw the truth. I thanked Rafik and left quickly, my mind already racing ahead. I needed to confront Daniel. Not with anger, not with emotion, but with facts. For once, I had the upper hand. That evening, I drove back to the family estate. The house looked even more imposing under the gray sky. Daniel's car was in the driveway, lights still on inside the study. I didn't knock. I just walked in. He looked up, startled but quickly composed himself. You shouldn't be here, he said, standing up. I dropped the folder on his desk. You've been stealing, I said quietly. Using Dad's name. Using the company's money. And you think no one will find out. He didn't even flinch. You think you know everything, don't you? I know enough, I said. Aurora Holdings. The fake contracts. The hidden accounts. I have proof, Daniel. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. Proof doesn't mean anything if no one believes you. For a second we just stared at each other. It wasn't like the arguments we used to have as kids. This was colder, darker. There was no brotherly warmth left between us. What happened to you? I asked quietly. When did it stop being about family? He laughed softly. Family? You think this was ever about family? You were the dreamer. The emotional one. Dad built a business, not a home. I learned that early. You never did. His words cut deep, but I didn't show it. You used him, I said. You used all of us. He walked closer, lowering his voice. You think you can go public with this? You think people will believe the one who was thrown out for not being capable? I stepped back slightly. I don't need them to believe me. I just need the truth to come out. He stared at me for a long time and then something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. You should leave before you make a mistake you can't undo, he said finally. But I didn't move. You're scared, I said. You wouldn't warn me if you weren't. He didn't answer. He just turned away and picked up his phone. "You have no idea what you're walking into," he muttered. That was the last thing he said before I walked out. Outside, the night air was sharp. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain. I could hear the faint sound of thunder far away, the sky flashing in uneven bursts of light. I knew this wasn't over. If anything, I just set something in motion I couldn't stop now. When I reached my car, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. Another message. This time a photo. It showed me leaving Daniel's house. The caption said only one thing: "You're being watched." I looked around, scanning the street, the corners, the parked cars. Nothing moved, but I could feel it, eyes somewhere in the dark. I got into my car and drove away, heart pounding. That night I didn't go home. I checked into a small motel outside the city. The air smelled of dust and old paint, but it felt safer than my apartment. I locked the door and sat by the window, thinking about everything that had led here. My father's illness. The hidden accounts. The warnings. The lies. But somewhere deep inside the fear, I also felt something else. Strength. They had taken everything from me once and I had survived. This time I wasn't going to lose. The next day I called Rafik again. "I need one more favor," I said. "Can you trace the source of those messages?" He agreed, but his tone was serious. "Be careful. If these people are as powerful as they seem, they won't play fair." While waiting for his update, I started recording everything, my version of the story. Not for the police, not for the press, but for myself. A record of what they'd done. Of who I was before they tried to erase me again. By evening, Rafik called back. His voice was tense. "The messages are coming from inside your father's company server," he said. "Someone close to them is helping you, but they're being monitored too." That realization hit hard. Whoever had been warning me wasn't my enemy, they were trapped in the same web. Later that night, another message came. "Meet me where it all started." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. There was only one place that message could mean: the boardroom. The same room where my family had decided I wasn't capable. I knew it was dangerous. I knew it could be a trap. But I also knew that this was it, the moment everything would come to light. As I drove through the quiet streets toward the office, the rain returned, heavier than before. The sky was dark, the lightning flashing like a warning. The city felt empty, silent, waiting. When I reached the building, every window was dark except one, the boardroom. A faint light glowed through the glass. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor as I walked in, every sound amplified by the silence. The door was slightly open. I pushed it gently, my breath shallow. Inside, the air was cold, the light flickering above the long wooden table. Someone was already there. I froze when I saw who it was. And in that instant, I knew the truth was finally about to reveal itself, no matter what it cost. The next morning began like any other, but there was something different in the air, something heavy, almost suffocating. The sun filtered weakly through the blinds, painting lines across my desk, but my mind was far away, caught between hope and unease. I had been working on a new project quietly for months, a business plan that could, if successful, change everything. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my place, my dignity, and proving that I was not the incapable one they had made me out to be. I had poured every ounce of my energy, time, and emotion into it. And yet, a strange restlessness wouldn't leave me. It was as if life was whispering that another storm was coming. Later that day, I received a call from an old family friend, Uncle Samir. He had always been close to my father before his passing, and his voice carried a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. But his words made my heart sink. "I need to tell you something," he said softly. "Your brothers, they're planning something behind your back. Something that could destroy your name in the business community before you even begin." I froze. My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping my phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. He hesitated for a moment before replying. "They've been spreading rumors that you stole from the family account years ago. They're trying to make sure no one invests in your company." It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I sat there in silence, my mind spinning. After everything, after being left out and humiliated, they were still not done. They wanted to crush me completely, to erase any trace of my name from the world we once built together. The betrayal stung deeper this time, not because I didn't expect it, but because it came from the very people I once defended. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow. I had lost their trust long ago, but now I realized they had never given me any to begin with. For the next few days I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of their faces around the long wooden table, the same table where the family business had once been planned, where laughter had filled the air before greed took over. Now it was just a memory haunted by betrayal. I went through old files, old letters from my father, trying to find something, anything, that could help me clear my name. And then I found it, a letter dated just a week before his passing. My heart pounded as I unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably his, though slightly shaky. He wrote about his dream of seeing all his children working together, but at the end, there was something that made my breath catch. If one is ever cast aside, remember, the strength of one honest heart is greater than the wealth of 10 greedy souls. Those words echoed in my head all night. They became my fuel. If they wanted to destroy me with lies, I would fight back with truth. I began to gather evidence. Old financial records, emails, and documents that proved I had never taken a single rupee that didn't belong to me. But what shocked me most was what I found hidden in one of the shared drives. A series of transfers under my eldest brother's name, disguised under company expenses. It wasn't me they needed to fear, it was their own reflection. But just as I was preparing to confront them, another twist hit me hard. My best friend, Ayan, the one person who had stood by me since the beginning of this nightmare, started acting distant. Calls went unanswered, meetings were postponed, and when I finally met him, his eyes avoided mine. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He sighed and looked down. "I didn't want to tell you this, but they reached out to me," he said. My stomach dropped. "They offered me a deal. A big one. If I stepped away from your company." For a moment I couldn't speak. It was like reliving the same betrayal in a different form. I stared at him, trying to find some trace of the friend who had once believed in me more than anyone else. "And did you take it?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. "I didn't want to," he said quietly, "but they made threats, about my family, my career. I'm sorry." He walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling the weight of the world closing in again. That night, I sat alone in my small office, surrounded by papers, documents, and memories. The city outside was alive with noise, but my world felt silent. Everything I had built was being torn apart, piece by piece, not by strangers but by people I once loved. I stared at my father's photo on the shelf, his calm eyes seeming to watch over me. "What would you do, Dad?" I whispered. "How do you fight when everyone you trust turns against you?" The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay quiet anymore. But instead of confronting them publicly, I planned something different. Something that would reveal the truth in a way they couldn't escape. I started reaching out to old employees who had left the company after my father's death. People who had witnessed things but were too afraid to speak. One by one they began to open up. What they told me confirmed my worst fears. My brothers had been manipulating records for years, slowly draining funds while blaming others when things went wrong. The lies had gone deeper than I could have imagined. Just as I was piecing everything together, I received a message from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I didn't know who sent it, but I had a feeling it came from someone close. Someone who knew exactly what I was doing. The fear was real, but so was my determination. I wasn't the same person they underestimated. I wasn't the helpless one anymore. I began documenting everything, creating backups, storing proof in multiple places, and preparing for what was coming. I could feel the storm building. Every word, every revelation, every lie I uncovered brought me closer to something bigger, something dangerous. But what I didn't realize then was that the real danger wasn't just outside. It was closer than I thought, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, it would change everything. The night before everything changed, the air outside was unusually still. It felt like even the wind was waiting for something to happen. I had everything ready, documents, proof, statements from witnesses. Months of pain, sleepless nights, and endless fear had come down to this single day. I was tired, but the kind of tired that comes from fighting too long and too hard to stop now. I looked at the folder on my desk that held everything. It wasn't just paper, it was the truth. The truth that would finally expose the lies that tore my family apart. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom, the same one where I'd once been told I wasn't capable. The memory of that day hit me like a cold wave, but this time, I wasn't the same person. I wasn't there to ask for a place. I was there to reclaim what was mine. My brothers sat across from me, confident and calm, their expressions smug as if they had already won. But underneath that calmness, I could see a flicker of nervousness in their eyes. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know how much I knew. "I think we all deserve to know the truth," I said, breaking the silence. My voice didn't shake this time. I opened the folder and laid out the evidence, one page after another, bank statements, emails, signed documents. Each one told a story of deception, greed, and betrayal. For a moment no one spoke. The sound of papers sliding across the table filled the room. My eldest brother leaned forward, his face pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. "From the company records," I replied. "The same ones you thought I'd never find." The air grew heavier. I could feel the tension rise with every word. One of the investors who had been quietly watching finally spoke up. "Is this true?" he asked, turning toward my brothers. They didn't answer. My youngest brother tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but no one believed him. The truth had finally surfaced and there was no going back. As the confrontation escalated, I stayed calm. For the first time, I wasn't fighting for approval. I was standing for myself. The investors started asking questions, demanding explanations. My brothers stumbled over their lies, trying to twist the story again, but every word only dug their hole deeper. I showed them one final document, a handwritten letter from my father, one I had kept hidden until now. "He trusted all of us," I said softly. "But you broke that trust for money. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed him too." That silence which followed was deafening. I saw guilt flash across their faces. One of them looked down, the other clenched his fists. The oldest finally spoke, his voice almost trembling. "Fine," he said bitterly. "Take it. Take everything you think you deserve. Maybe you'll finally feel capable." His words carried no power anymore. They sounded empty, hollow, defeated. I picked up the folder, met his gaze, and said quietly, "I never wanted to take what's yours. I just wanted what's fair." For a moment, it felt like everything was finally over. Justice had been served. The truth was out and my name was clear. The investors sided with me, promising to help rebuild the company under honest leadership. I should have felt relieved, but deep down something didn't sit right. Something was missing. Later that evening, as I left the office, I received a message from an unknown number again. It read, "You think it's over, but you only exposed half the truth." I froze, staring at the screen. My pulse quickened. Before I could respond, another message appeared. "Your father's letter wasn't the last one. He left something else, something they never wanted you to find." I rushed home and went straight to my father's old study, a place I hadn't entered in years. The smell of old books and wood filled the air, and for a moment, I felt like I was a child again, sitting beside him as he worked. I searched through drawers and boxes until I found a sealed envelope hidden behind a framed family photo. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was another letter, along with a small key. The letter was short, but its words sent chills down my spine. "My child, if you are reading this, it means you've already seen what your brothers became. But there's something you must know. The business you are fighting for, it was never meant to divide you. There's another account, one that holds everything in your name. I trusted only one person to protect it, someone who's closer to you than you realize." I stared at the page, my mind spinning. Another account? Someone protecting it? Who could it be? My first thought was Uncle Samir, but then I noticed a faint signature at the bottom. Not my father's usual one, but one with different initials. It was Ayan's. My breath caught. He wasn't just my friend, he had known about this all along. The betrayal, the distance, the guilt in his eyes, it all made sense now. Before I could call him, my phone rang. It was Ayan. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "You found it, didn't you?" he said. I didn't answer. "I wanted to tell you everything, but your brothers threatened my family. I had to keep it secret until it was safe. That account, it's yours. Your father trusted me to protect it until you were ready." I didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. My chest tightened with emotions I couldn't name. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, tears burning my eyes. "Because," he replied softly, "I needed you to fight for yourself first. You had to prove to them, and to yourself, that you could do it without anyone's help. That's what your father wanted." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the pain, the struggle, suddenly felt worth it. I realized then that the real victory wasn't the company or the money. It was rediscovering my strength, my worth, and my belief in myself. As I stood there holding the letter and the key, I looked out the window. The night sky was clear for the first time in weeks. I whispered to myself, they divided the business, but they couldn't divide me. The story had come full circle, but deep inside I knew it wasn't truly over. Because now, with the key in my hand, I wasn't just fighting for what was lost. I was about to uncover something even bigger, something that could change everything all over again. The next morning, I woke up to a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. The sunlight coming through the curtains seemed softer, warmer, almost like the world was finally breathing again. I sat quietly, holding the key my father had left me. It was small and simple, yet it felt like the weight of my entire past rested in my palm. After everything I'd gone through, the betrayal, the loss, the pain, this key was more than a symbol. It was the last piece of a puzzle my father had started long before I even understood what it meant to fight for something. Ayan came over later that morning. He looked exhausted but peaceful, like someone who had been carrying a heavy secret for far too long and could finally let it go. We sat in silence for a while before he finally spoke. "There's one more thing your father wanted you to see," he said quietly. He handed me an old wooden box. The edges were worn and the lock fit perfectly with the key I had. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a small leather journal. On the first page, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "For when you're ready to understand everything." I began to read through the pages one by one. My father had written about the early days of building the business, how it was never meant to be about power or profit but about unity and trust. He wrote about his hopes for each of us, how he saw potential in every child, but how fear and pride had slowly torn that vision apart. He had known that conflicts would arise after his passing, and that's why he created the second account, to protect the values he believed in, not the money. It wasn't a secret fortune like I'd imagined. It was a trust fund meant for rebuilding, not revenge. A foundation for something new. Reading his words made me realize that all this time, I had been chasing something I thought I'd lost, when in truth, I had been building something stronger, myself. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, it had shaped me into someone my father would have been proud of. I looked up at Ayan, who was watching quietly. "He knew everything, didn't he?" I asked. Ayan nodded slowly. "He did. He wanted to make sure that when the time came, you would rise because of your heart, not because of anger." We spent the next few weeks finalizing everything. The evidence I had exposed led to a full investigation of the company's financial history. My brothers were forced to step down, not because I wanted revenge but because it was the only way to restore honesty and trust. I took over the company temporarily, not as an owner but as a caretaker. My goal was to rebuild what my father had dreamed of, not to destroy what was left. I reached out to my brothers after the dust settled. At first they refused to talk. But slowly, one by one, they came around. It wasn't easy. There were long silences, awkward pauses, and a lot of tears that never quite fell. But we started small, just conversations about the past, about where things went wrong. I told them I didn't hate them even though they had hurt me deeply. I told them that the business didn't matter as much as family did. They listened quietly, and for the first time in years, I saw something real in their eyes: regret. One evening, as we sat together, my eldest brother finally spoke. "We were wrong," he said softly. "We thought success meant control. But you proved it's about something else." I smiled faintly and said, "It's about building something worth remembering." That moment didn't erase the past, but it started healing it. Meanwhile, I used my father's trust fund to start a new initiative, a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs who had been underestimated just like I was. I wanted to give others the chance to rise above doubt and fear. The business grew, but not because of profit. It grew because it carried meaning. Every person I helped reminded me of the pain I once felt, but also of the strength I had gained through it. Ayan stayed by my side, helping me build the new foundation from scratch. Our friendship, once shaken by secrets, became stronger than ever. Sometimes we would talk late into the night about everything that had happened. The lies, the loss, the lessons. "You know," Ayan said one evening, smiling faintly, "your father was right. The strength of one honest heart really is greater than the wealth of 10 greedy souls." I laughed softly. "I used to think that was just a nice line," I said, "but now I know it's the truth." Months passed and life slowly began to feel normal again. The chaos that had once surrounded me faded into the background, replaced by purpose. I visited my father's grave often, not out of sadness but gratitude. I'd sit there quietly, telling him about the progress we were making, how his dream was finally alive again. This time built on honesty and love. Sometimes the wind would pick up softly as if he was listening. Then one day as I walked through the office, I saw something that stopped me. On the wall near the entrance hung a new sign, a quote we had chosen together as a team. It read, "They said I wasn't capable. So I started anyway." I stood there for a long time, reading those words over and over. They weren't just my story anymore. They belonged to everyone who had ever been told they couldn't make it, everyone who had been left behind but chose to keep going anyway. I realized that life had a strange way of turning pain into purpose. Sometimes the people who hurt you are the very ones who push you toward your true strength. My family's betrayal had once felt like the end of everything, but in the end, it became the reason I discovered who I really was. I didn't win by defeating them, I won by forgiving them and moving forward. Years later, as I looked back, I didn't see loss anymore. I saw growth. I saw lessons carved from pain, courage born from silence, and love that survived even through the darkest moments. I learned that being not capable wasn't an insult, it was a challenge. And I had met it. So when people asked how it all began, I would smile and say softly, it began the day they told me I couldn't. Because that was the moment I found my fire. That was the moment everything changed. In the end, I didn't just rebuild a business. I rebuilt myself. And maybe that was the real legacy my father wanted me to carry. Not the wealth, not the name, but the strength to stand tall, even when no one believed I could. And as I locked the office door that night, looking out at the city lights, I whispered to the sky, "Thank you, Dad." Because I finally understood, it was never about proving them wrong. It was always about proving myself right.